All right, get those headphones ready, because today we are diving headfirst into a true music tech legend, the Oberheim DMX drum machine.
The DMX.
Released back in 1980, you might think it's just a vintage relic, but trust me, this thing's DNA is woven into the music we still hear today.
It's true.
And we're going to break down exactly how.
Sounds good.
This all started with a blog post we stumbled on, Oberheim DMX by GForce. History, tech specs, even some producer tips in there. They've got it all. So buckle up, because we're about to find out why this vintage drum machine is far from a blast from the past.
What's wild about the DMX is it wasn't just some gadget hitting the shelves. This thing dropped right at a pivotal moment in music history, you know?
Typically.
Like late 70s, early 80s, you had analog synths ruling the scene, but digital was right there on the horizon, about to flip everything on its head. And bam, the DMX emerges, one of the very first drum machines to go all in on digital sampling. Total game changer. Suddenly, you didn't have to rely on those kind of wonky synthesized drums anymore.
Yeah.
The DMX was like, nope, we got the real deal, or as close as you could get back then.
Yeah.
And man, thinking about how different music sounded before, this was massive.
And get this, they didn't just sample any old drums. They brought in real drummers, top-notch recordings to create this thing. It's like they assembled the Avengers of music tech. Even Roger Lynn, the sampling guru himself, was involved.
Exactly. And capturing that human element, that feel, that was everything.
You can hear it, right? Like drum machines before, often really stiff, robotic almost.
Right. Yeah.
But the DMX had this warmth, this groove. No wonder it blew up.
It did. It was familiar yet futuristic at the same time. Classic sounds, but with this new digital edge. It's no wonder it resonated across so many genres.
Okay, but let's get into the guts of this thing.
Yeah.
Beyond being ahead of its time, what made it tick? This blog post dives into the features. One that caught my eye was the whole 12-bit processing. Now, I'm no tech whiz, but that had to be a big deal back then, right?
Oh, huge. This is 1980, remember. 12-bit processing for drums. Practically unheard of. Gave producers this incredible richness, a dynamic range that just wasn't there before. It's part of why drums today sound so much clearer, punchier than older recordings. Revolutionary stuff.
And on top of that, it had separate outputs for each drum sound.
You got it. So you take those already amazing samples, but now you can tweak each one individually, EQ, compression, whatever you want. That level of control over the mix was insane. Like having a real drummer right there, adjusting their kit just for you.
Wow. They were really pushing limits.
Yeah.
Makes you think of what they could have done with today's tech, right? But it sounds like the DMX wasn't just about the sounds themselves, but about giving musicians the tools to shape them in totally new ways.
Exactly. Speaking of tools, we can't forget the programmable memory, storing up to 100 patterns, 50 songs. Mind-blowing back then.
No laptops, no fancy software. Having that much storage on a drum machine alone was huge, both live and in the studio. Game changer.
And it's important to remember, even with all this tech, they never lost sight of the feel, the groove. That's where the swing function comes in, you know? The slight variations in timing to give it that human touch.
They knew realistic sounds weren't enough.
Yeah.
Needed that human imperfection to make it groove.
Right. And this is where things get really interesting. One of the most forward-thinking features on the DMX, replaceable EPROMs. This was revolutionary.
Replaceable, huh? I kind of made you lost me a little there. What were these EPROMs all about?
Okay, so picture this. They're like the original sound packs, right? Little chips that held all the drum sounds. But here's the cool part. You could swap them out.
Okay.
So on different drum kits, different percussion, boom, you could completely change the sonic identity of the DMX.
Wow, they really did invent customization way ahead of the game. This thing was cutting edge and built for the future all in one. But enough about the techie stuff for a sec. How did the DMX actually change the sound of music? Like one machine? How to do that?
All right, so this is where it gets really fun. The DMX wasn't just a cool gadget. It became the sound of a generation. You know what I mean?
No, for real.
Right.
You can't talk early hip-hop without mentioning the DMX.
Exactly.
Run DMC, Beastie Boys. That raw energy, that gritty sound, it all traces back to the DMX.
Totally. Those punchy snares, those deep kicks, that was the sound of early hip-hop. And it wasn't just the sounds, it was how the DMX let artists arrange them, create those grooves. Perfect for that DIY hip-hop spirit.
And for anyone thinking, okay, cool, but hip-hop's not my thing,
Yeah.
don't think for a second the DMX was a one-trick pony. This thing was everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Pop, R&B, you name it. Prince loved the DMX, used it on a ton of his hits. Even producers from Madonna, Whitney Houston, they were all drawn to it.
It's crazy how one drum machine ended up on so many different tracks.
Yeah.
What do you think gave it that universal appeal, crossing genres like it was nothing?
It goes back to what we were saying, that perfect blend of awesome sound quality, but still raw and human. It had soul. That connected with musicians no matter what they were playing.
It's true, like a common musical language everyone could speak.
Huh.
So we've gone from its birth to its rise to fame. But here's the big question I know everyone's thinking. Is this just a history lesson, or is the DMX still relevant today?
Now we're getting to the good stuff. While the original hardware is a collector's item now, the DMX's legacy is still going strong.
Our blog post actually gets into this. It's not just collectors, you know. There are ways to experience the DMX even if you aren't a gear fanatic.
Exactly. For one, the software emulations out there are incredible. They've nailed the sound, the vibe of the original hardware. Anyone with a laptop can get in on this.
We're not talking about those cheap knockoffs, right?
Right.
These are the real deal, the kind even pros use.
Oh, yeah. Some even go beyond the original, adding features they couldn't have dreamed of in the 80s.
Best of both worlds then. Classic sound, modern convenience. Speaking of which, the blog post mentioned some cool tips for using the DMX in today's music. Want to dig into that a bit?
Sure, layering's a great one. Take those iconic DMX samples, layer them with modern drums, get that vintage grit and modern punch all at once.
Ooh, I like that. Bridging the eras in one track. Sounds like a recipe for some unique soundscapes. What other tricks are up producers' sleeves?
The swing. The DMX's swing is legendary. Use that to inject that signature groove into your music, even with totally different sounds.
So it's like sprinkling a little DMX magic, no matter the genre. This is what I love. It's not about copying the past, it's taking those classic elements and flipping them into something new.
Exactly. The possibilities are endless. Imagine those punchy snares through a modern distortion plugin. Those deep kicks drenched in reverb.
Now we're talking. It's like this whole sonic world opens up when you see vintage gear as inspiration, not just a museum piece.
Couldn't agree more. Respect the past, but don't be afraid to push it forward, you know.
I dig it. So as we wrap up our DMX deep dive, what I find incredible is how this machine from 1980 still has so much to teach us.
Totally. The DMX shows us how one piece of tech can shape genres, inspire for years, and still be relevant today. Makes you think, what's out there now that'll have that same impact? What'll we be talking about 40 years from now?
Ooh, good question. What's sparking that same creative fire today? Makes you think about the future of music, how it's unfolding all around us. It really makes you realize that sometimes the most groundbreaking stuff, it's not about chasing the next big thing, you know?
It's all about those core elements, right? Sound quality, that human element, those little sparks of ingenuity that take something from good to legendary.
Exactly, and the DMX nailed it. No wonder we're still feeling its impact, both in the music itself and the tools musicians use today.
You know, that blog post we keep coming back to, Oberheim DMX by GForce, it actually mentions some really specific ways people are using the DMX today. Like some producers, they're taking samples from the original DMX hardware just to inject that authentic vintage vibe into their tracks.
Oh, wow, that's cool. It's like taking a little piece of music history and weaving it into something totally new.
Right. And it goes beyond sampling, too. Some of these software emulations, like the one from GForce, they're so accurate it's scary. Producers can recreate those iconic DMX sounds right on their computers.
So even though the actual DMX might be hard to come by these days, its sound is still within reach.
Totally. And it's inspiring to see how producers now are taking those sounds, using them in genres they couldn't have imagined back in the 80s. Proof that great sounds never really die out.
True that. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Oberheim DMX, I think the big takeaway is how much impact one invention can have.
Absolutely. The DMX's reach, it goes way beyond just its initial release. It shaped genres, inspired countless artists, and still influences production today.
It reminds us that sometimes the best innovations aren't just about pushing technology forward, but pushing creativity forward too. And who knows what sonic frontiers we'll be exploring 40 years from now. Maybe we'll be right back here unpacking the sounds of today, tracing them back to some totally unexpected inspiration.
Now that's a deep dive for another day.
It sure is. But for now, that wraps up our exploration of the legendary Oberheim DMX. We journeyed through its tech, its cultural significance, and its surprising relevance today. Huge thanks to that awesome blog post from UD Audio for getting us started. You can find the link in our show notes if you're hungry for more.
And let us know what modern music tech you think has that DMX magic. What do you think will leave a lasting legacy? Until next time, keep those sonic explorations going.